I'm showing you this picture and here because Nuki Aldridge's evidence to the Waitangi Tribunal is where this role play comes from. He gave really strong evidence about a period that's often kind of mocked in colonial discourse, and it's the period around the time of the trading that we do with our trading cards in our Tangata Tiriti workshop, when the rangatira began to gather into an assembly that later Busby called the Confederation of Chiefs. So it pops into our knowledge just as the Confederation of Chiefs. But Nuki spent a lot of time with us explaining that area there in Waitangi, that space, the marae Atia really, that's there between the rocky headland of Paihia and the Te Tiriti o Waitangi marae itself. That space is where a hapu, Te Kemara's hapu, lived, but it became a space and was always called Te Tō Rangatira. And that word Te Tō Rangatira, it literally means, the seat of leaders. It's where leaders sit down to have counsel and to gather. And Nuki explained that there are tō rangatira all around the country, and they've been there for the whole time that Māori have been here, because some of you know the saying, hea ha te kai o ngā rangatira, what is the food of rangatira? Ko te kōrero, te kai o ngā rangatira. Talk is the food of rangatira. So rangatira, it's not about war, it's about have always sat and talked in council. So that was Nuki's evidence that we were sitting there in our tent in the tribunal hearing, right there on Tō Rangatira, and that tradition was then developed further when the chiefs wanted to talk about the contact with the international world. So Nuki explained a lot about how the Declaration of Independence came out of that kōrero and then hence the treaty. So the role play that I want to demonstrate to you, some of you have seen it in different forms, others of you haven't seen it at all. So we'll work our way through that. Just before we do, Marisa pointed out with her avid ear for which languages were we speaking, that we've been using a term like matua, and tamaiti and mokopuna, and just to make it really clear and to go back to that beautiful part of the evidence that Hemi mentioned, that where matua means parent, tamaiti means child, and you went on to mention the mokopuna, that is how Nuki explained in the hearings, put it really clearly, that the Declaration of Independence is the parent, so te whakaputanga, which is the word you can see on the board behind you. That's the parent document. The Declaration of Independence. The treaty is the child of that document. And then you said that the United Nations Declaration can be seen as the mokopuna. Yes, okay. And that's lovely. On the rights of Indigenous people. So that becomes the whakapapa of the Tiriti o Waitangi, like that, down. So that's a beautiful way of remembering it, and it's often said now, ko te whakaputanga, te matua, ko te tiriti te tamaiti. So to link it into the way that you might be doing your treaty workshops, however you're helping people understand the international focus and contact that hapu were having from the early 1800s on, then this leads us to this document here, but it does it via something called te waka minenga o ngā hapu o Nutireni. And the middle of this word helps us understand it. Mine meaning assemble. So the assembly of the hapu of Nutireni. This is something from Susan Healy, just to get you in the mindset of what we're showing here. The waka minenga was likened to the United Nations in its structure, and I know many of you present hapu as being nations, and then when they're gathered, it's United Nations. And this is just to remind you of those of you who are using the slideshow that Marisa and Susan developed. So it's at this point when that thing comes up on the slideshow, the flag, that's when this is really useful to do. So we'll turn that off now and go from there. I'll be giving you a handout of all of this, so don't worry, you'll get it in a handout, and there'll be a script, a more developed script elsewhere. So kia ora koutou. We're now thinking about, we've learned about how lively and dynamic international trade was, but we're thinking about how did the Māori world organise itself to deal with these international contacts, visitors and issues that were arriving. So we're going to do this by looking at what rangatira were actually doing in the time between the 1800s and the treaty itself, leading into the declaration, and seeing that they chose a flag, that they signed a declaration, and were then ready for the next step, which was the treaty. And the story actually begins in 1805, and we'll work our way round through to what happened later. And what I'm going to be asking you to do, this is a silent role play. So it's a role play where when you're invited forward, you just need to sit and look decisive and authoritative. So look like a rangatira. That's your role, and my role is to narrate the events that happened. At the end of this, I'll show you a way that you can do it where you can read your narration from a script as you get more used to it. So the story begins in 1805 when a rangatira called Te Pahi from the north, he was a senior rangatira, and it was in the hapu that he was connected to that some of the issues were beginning to happen, that where visitors to this country were disobeying Māori law, and also, this is what Te Pahi noticed, disobeying their own law. So he was an observant man, a thoughtful man. So I need somebody to come forward and just sit as Te Pahi. So you, man or woman, there were plenty of women rangatira. Kia ora, Dave, you're off your seat already. Kia ora, Dave. So you're Te Pahi, take a seat. And Te Pahi, you're worried about these. You can see this clash of law systems, and you particularly notice that the behaviour of especially these sea captains, some of whom are even kidnapping Māori sailors at times, that their behaviour would be illegal in their own country. So you want to have a whole conversation about now whose law is covering those people, those visitors. So Te Pahi, you go to Sydney and you visit the governor there in Sydney. And say to him, you know, I'm staying for dinner. In fact, I'll stay for a month. And we need to have a conversation about how this is going to work with your people coming to my country. So you are his honoured guest, but sadly, well, and you say to him very clearly, you need to control your sea captains that come to my country. And his answer to you is, I'm sorry, I can't. When they're off the decks of their ships, the navies of the various ships no longer have control of them. So Te Pahi, you resolve that you are going to come home, and actually you and your fellow rangatira are going to organise this yourselves. So Te Pahi begins to invite other rangatira into what comes to be called Te Wakaminenga, the General Assembly of United Hapu. And his thinking is that tikanga can operate at many levels, and that he and the others will develop tikanga that covers the visitors. So, Te Pahi, there's two people, one person you definitely want in your assembly. Now that is the Napoleon of the North, the general who's been doing the musket raids further south, and you may know his name. He's a rangatira of very famous Ngāpuhi name, rangatira that did a lot of leading of his armies further south. But kia ora, Phoebe, hongi hika. So not his Hone Heke, who signed the treaty, was his nephew-in-law, was married to Hongi's daughter. So this is Hongi Hika, an older rangatira than the younger Hone Heke. Kia ora, Hongi. Now, you're this very staunch and strong warrior, but a man who is focused on authority and how it applies in different places. So Hongi, time is going by. We're getting closer to the kind of later 15, 16, 17, and you're thinking, what's needed here with this business of law is that we need to go to England and talk to the actual rangatira of these people. Because as you've explained, Te Pahi, the governor is just a servant of the rangatira of England. So, Hongi, you're ready to go to England. It's now 1820 and you're going to visit King George. But this is such a large gathering by now that it already needs a secretary. So we need somebody of an administrative bent. Anyone who's an administrator in their job. Kia ora. Kia ora. Mercy. This is highly appropriate. So, your name is Waikato. So even though you're in the north, your name is Waikato. You're also a rangatira close to in the area of Te Pahi. And you're the one who notes what this gathering decides each meeting and brings it back to the next meeting. So you're the one that doesn't let them forget their minutes and their decisions from the previous meeting. So kia ora Waikato. And Hongi, you don't go to England by yourself. You take Waikato with you. In other words, you're not going as some kind of renegade to make any kind of deal. You're actually being accountable to your whole group. So these two rangatira go to London in 1820, and in London they are the absolute love of the paparazzi. They follow them everywhere, they paint pictures of them, and you also have a lot of time with George and really have discussions with him. So Hongi and George, Hori, so Hongi and Hori do build a relationship of rangatira to rangatira. So king to king, that's how they talk about it. In fact, Hori, George, asks Hongi, are you the king of New Zealand? And Hongi replies, no, I am a king among kings. Then what's discussed is you want free trade. You want a preferential trade deal with the British because they're already taking, your timber is going to the British Navy, your beautiful flax is making muka for their ropes, your seals are going to your whale and so on. So you say, England, no restrictions on trade, meaning also no restrictions on the musket trade. And King George says, absolutely, we'll be delighted. And then you, Hongi, say back to George, you say, in return for that, we promise to let your people live here in peace. And it's by Ngāpuhi, it's called Hongi's Great Promise. So 1820, 20 years before the Treaty of Waitangi, that's been established king to king, rangatira to rangatira. So it's very important in the Ngāpuhi whakapapa of the treaty. So kia ora kōrua, you did very well. Now, meanwhile, while they're doing all that, the trade is continuing, the healthy, dynamic trade, and it's continuing with Sydney. So we've got two rangatira in the Hokianga who own all the kauri, and they have set up, they run the first shipbuilding yards in New Zealand. They're in the very mouth of the top of the Hokianga harbour at a place called Horeke. And so we need the two rangatira who are running the shipbuilding yards in Horeke. So we need Patuone and Taonui. Kia ora kōrua. Ching and Samantha, right. So you're Patuone and you're Taonui. And Taonui, you are so good at the shipbuilding. You can look at a ship from 100 metres and tell exactly what the lengths of the spars are. So you're a bit of an engineer, really. And Patuone, you're a man of peace, really. You go on later in life to settle just on the north shore of Auckland to protect the Auckland Pākehā settlement from any further threats from Ngāpuhi. So you're a man who really cares about peace. So you've built a beautiful new ship called the Sir George Murray. We're up to 1831 now. Beautiful new ship, the Sir George Murray. It's on its maiden voyage to Sydney. It's full of exports. It'll be fish, timber, pumpkins apparently, food for Sydney. And on this particular day in 1831, the harbour master in Sydney, you know, the penal colony there, decides that you're not flying any flag that he recognises, and so he confiscates your ship and your cargo. To see how these two feel about this. How do you feel about that? She's puffing and huffing. You know, you're not happy. And Patuone, you're on board, and so you go immediately to the governor, who you have a relationship with through Te Pahi, and say, we have to do something about this. This isn't good enough. You know, you've been using and relying on our New Zealand food for many a long year, and so has the Singapore colony, and so have the California, you know, goldfields, and so on. So we need a way that New Zealand shipping can have its sign that is respected elsewhere. So you begin the conversation with the governor, you bring it back to your fellow and your peers here. So the conversation begins about how could a flag look for this country. Now Busby's arrived in the meantime, so yes, we need a chair for Busby. Somebody to come and be Busby. We won't be horrible to you, promise. So Busby is the British resident, so King George has sent him in the meantime because George knows that this whole group is there to be spoken to as the authorities of New Zealand. Oh, kia ora, Aram. James Busby. So James Busby. So you're actually, sometimes they invite you to their meeting, but you're not always invited, so you don't always know that they're meeting. But in these flag discussions, you're really welcome, and you know, Patuone and Taunui explain it, and so on. The missionary Williams is probably also involved. So the decisions go back and forth, a few flags are sewn up, and eventually a flag is chosen. So as some of you saw on the slide, you can ask the group at that point, what colours do you think the flag is that they choose? Red, white, blue. Why would that be? Why would they be those three colours? Yep, they link to the British colours. Yep, that's exactly right. Oh, kia ora, Patuone and Taunui. Here we go. It's very appropriate, the English lady. And what do you see in that flag? What's one major symbol that you see? The Cross of St George, and that's understandable given this relationship that Hongi and Hori have made with each other. And the other big symbol that you see there, big symbols, the stars here. Which there are many stories about this, about the origin of the stars, and Ngāpuhi carry those, but yes, they could be the constellation. Which constellation would it be? Yeah, the Southern Cross. So possibly they were chosen for that it links all the navigation in the Southern Oceans. It actually links ngā rangatira o ngā hapu Māori here, as well as all these people who are sailing to New Zealand. That's one explanation of the stars. So kia ora korua, you've chosen a flag that is recognised now by all the colonial navies of the world. So it is recognised as the national flag of this country. And what are those colonial navies? Let's work them out. Who are they? The French? British? American? The Australian is part of the British. Yeah, they're just coming by. The Dutch, thank you. Yes. A couple of others. The Spanish, yes. Portuguese, kia ora. Yeah. So they are all recognising this flag. So that's, in fact, in the international law, the first step in becoming a nation, in the modern sense, is to have a flag recognised by other nations. So, in fact, these rangatira were extremely proud of their achievement in being able to fly this flag, that it was recognised directly by George. He immediately wrote a letter, the British Colonial Office wrote a letter, and it was gazetted by all the other navies. So, kia ora for, it's the beginning of they call it the emergence of the nationhood of New Zealand is how the rangatira described the process. Yeah. And just being recognised on the high seas as not being pirates, completely being a legal, recognised, constituted nation. So, Te Pahi and his colleagues were very proud of that, and Patu Hohepa, as Hemi said, were very proud of that first step into what they recognised as this modern international interaction on the high seas. Now, hapu all around the country were noticing that this was going on. Remember, the musket wars are over, we're up to 1834, so they start coming to these meetings. They start coming to the north to these meetings. Having said that, their own meetings were going on in their areas. So, Te Tau Rangatira was operating everywhere in any case, but, people started coming to these to talk about how can we make trading law, how can we make occupation law, how can we make law that will keep the peace among these the nations that are here. So we need some others from further south start arriving. So we need a Tainui person to represent the person who became the king of the Kingitanga, but when he was a bit younger, when he was still 60 years old. So someone to come and be, do people know the name of the man who became the king? Kia ora, te whero. You're 60 years old and you're fit. So you're making your way to the north and sitting in, you're no longer at war with Ngāpuhi. This is, the rangatira changed so quickly from the one type of interaction to the other, because ultimately what was at the heart of it was the health and wealth and prosperity of your hapu. The colonial story is, that's what hapu do, they make war. No, what hapu do is do whatever it takes to be prosperous and for the well-being of the hapu. So for you, te whero, right, now you can actually meet with your colleagues in Ngāpuhi and be talking about this international trade and about literacy, all those things that you know about. So kia ora te whero, you're at home. Now there was another nation, another iwi just south of Tainui who often took their lead from the bigger nations around them. So the people around the Central Plateau and the Tongariro area. So people know the name of that iwi? Kia ora, come and be tūwharetoa, Angela. So you're from the Ariki family, Te Hiuhiu, but not Mananui, who was the tuakana, but his younger brother, Iwiko. Iwiko Te Hiuhiu is your name, so the younger brother, yeah. Now you're absolutely everywhere. You're a bit like Hone Heke. You're dashing about making relationships. So you make your way up here because your colleague Te Whero is here. You're young enough to be running back and forth, or paddling back and forth. Now we're going to, Busby, we have to move you over, I'm afraid. Over here. All right. Kia ora. So we need and one other big iwi was listening to all this going on. And if you think about distances of the sailing ships of the time, even the waka of the time, it wasn't that far. So we're talking about the big Wairarapa coastline. The big Wairarapa coastline. What's the big iwi along that coastline? Ai. Kia ora, Hemi. Bring your chair. So not far from you, from Ngāti Porou. Yeah. So Ngāti Kahungunu, and the rangatira from there was called Te Hapuku. Te Hapuku, who was very, he'd been involved on the Mahia Peninsula ever since the whalers got there, and he loved bossing the whalers around. He was quite clear that they were in his territory in his seas, and that it was up to him to tell them what the tikanga was around that area. So kia ora te hapuku. And it only takes about 2 days, I think, to sail to the Bay of Islands, 2 or 3 days. And your people have tuku whenua land actually in the Coromandel. So you stop over to see the whānau there, eat their kumara that they've been growing, and carry on. So you're delighted now to be connected, to maybe it was harder to walk into Tūwharetoa and Tainui. Now you're meeting them up there. Yeah. And then we've got one more. Busby, I'm sorry, you've got to move along again. One more group of iwi, and it's just all the Ngai, or all the southern tribes actually, the Te Waipounamu tribes. So anyone with a connection to the South Island. This is your first introduction to the South Island. Kia ora.
I want to go anywhere.
She wants to go there. Yeah. So the southern tribes are listening into this. They're having their wānanga, you know, they're sending people, especially up the western side, up to through the Hokianga. Pat Hohepa said really clearly that they had their te Taipotini and Ngai Tahu connections listening in to all these discussions. So we've got now gathered here, you can see most of the North Island and lots of connections from the south. In fact, Brenda, you could even be the rangatira called Tu Hawaiki, who's a rangatira from the Christchurch Dunedin area. He kind of defended that whole area. You are going independently over to the governor in Sydney to have talks about how you might arrange these. So you kind of are like the te pahi of the south. You're having independent conversations. So that's brilliant. So once we have all these rangatira gathered and this much of the country thinking, let's use tikanga as a way of coming up with a united arrangements for the newcomers, you begin thinking, and Busby advises you, that a really good idea would be to put a written document under that flag. Many of you know, and Busby describes it, look, the French have just done this, the Americans have got a constitution, that's becoming more common internationally. So in fact what the group do next, only 1 year later in 1835, is they do write a declaration. It's been called by Busby the Declaration of Independence. We'll look in a minute and see that the Māori translation's probably more a declaration of sovereignty. So we're just going to press pause here and everyone just turn to the person next to you and discuss with them, what would you say in a declaration to the international world at this stage in this country? What would you say? Kia ora everyone. We'll cut it short because in fact it's really simple. So I'll just go around and ask just your thoughts about what these rangatira put into this declaration. So I'll just ask each pair, and if you've got advances on the previous, great. Kia ora, Busby and Tu Hawaiki, what did you think?
For me, it's like I would acknowledge where we are in the world.
Yes. Yep.
Tell us that we are resourceful, that's where we are located.
Yes, that you're resourceful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, kia ora. Yeah.
That we have a way of operating that might be different from how other people are operating, and
Yeah.
we have a shared understanding of that we want to make sure others know.
Yes. Yes, it's our way.
Yeah, establishing our authority and,
Yes.
and how others can participate.
Yes, and being very clear, it's our authority. Kia ora. Oh, yes, you're thinking like a rangatira now. Kia ora.
This is the sovereign land, that's our sovereign land.
Yes. Kia ora. Absolutely.
Saying ditto.
Yeah, yeah. But making it very clear it's yours. Yes.
We're
Kia ora.
the boss.
We're the boss. Yes. Oh, she's getting close. It's very good.
Being open and honest and sharing.
Yes.
No barriers.
Ah.
Also between a partnership.
Remember, we're not at the treaty yet. This is not yet the treaty, so it's not making any negotiations with anybody else at this stage. Yeah, so you're not talking to any other nation in terms of a negotiated agreement. No, you're just making a statement about yourselves and this country. So thank you for bringing that up. So you're already thinking peacefully forward in a very, a peaceful way towards the treaty. Hold that thought. Kia ora.
Thinking about maybe announcing what allies you had outside of your own country, so what other relationships connected you to the international stage already.
Very canny. You've done a bit of international diplomacy. See, this is hongi hika. Yeah, but that's true. Hongi would say that. He'd say, and we are friends with England. Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, because I did, you know, I was there 20 years, 15 years ago. Right, kia ora. What are your thoughts?
Somebody said that although we have various iwi that for the purpose of this would be operating as one unified body
Yes.
to be recognized as a sovereign internationally and on an equal
Yes.
par with other nations.
Right. Lovely. Yeah, don't treat us all as individual hapu. Think of us as a collaborative congress, yep, to negotiate with. Kia ora. Thank you.
Joanna's just gone, but she was talking about like stating who we are.
Yes.
Firstly, and then about like declaring sovereignty, kind of in the anticipation or like negotiating what kind of relationship would be like with colonizers.
Yes, except at this stage there's no sense that there are any colonisers.
Yeah, that's what
I know. It's really interesting to hold in 1835. The Māori nation is flourishing and the trade is, I mean, our balance of payments in this country were never so good as in the years before the treaty. In other words, all the exporting is coming out from them and very little is being imported. So all the wealth, the payments are going in to the hapu. So the hapu are in an amazingly flourishing position. So there's not even a thought of colonisers on the horizon. Yeah. It's really important, that point. The colonial discourse often talks about, the French were patrolling around with a warship. And there's a lot talked about that. And in the Ngāpuhi hearings, when we, got this kind of image, and people like Hone Sadler and Pato Hepa were saying, I don't think so. How many waka did we have compared to one French warship? We had thousands. And so there wasn't a feeling of being threatened. What there was a feeling of, though, was a feeling threatened by the way those European nations assume that they have the right. So there was the feeling of how can we settle this so that they understand really clearly, who's in charge and what the tikanga will be. Yeah, so it was the mindset. Yeah, so like, kia ora, it's really good to bring up that point. Yeah. So I'll pass out the actual document, which is called the wakaputanga. That word means the emergence, and then you'll recognise the words that come later. But it does mean the emergence. So we're just moving on from the flag, and you know that little piece of the slideshow, those of you who work with those resources. That's what you've just said. And let's look at what it does actually say. So now this is a very shortened form, and then I will go into the te reo. First thing to ask you, if you look on the left-hand side of your piece of paper, that column, what's the first thing you notice about it? It's in te reo Māori. I'll just go straight to that. This is the actual document and how it looks. As Hemi said, it is now viewable for all of us in the exhibition at the National Library in Wellington. And you can see the words are at the top, he wakaputanga o te rangatiratanga o Nutireni, and the underlined phrase in the first paragraph is saying that's who we are, ko te wakaminenga, we are the assembly of the hapu of Nutireni. So that's what it looks like. I'll just show, we'll just look at your signatures there. You can recognise some there, and we'll get on to page 2, where if you look at the signatures there, you can see Taonui's there. Patuone is there. And if you look right down the bottom, Taonui's way down the bottom, and even further at the very, very bottom, below the little coloured parts on the board, you can see Te Whero is there. Okay. So we'll just go back. So this is the very easy statement that Marisa has in our slideshow about, yes, the Northern Rangatira definitely declare their area to be an independent area. And they say absolutely that all the sovereign power and authority rests with, and they use the phrase, ko mātou ko ngā tino rangatira, we are the absolute authorities. They do something interesting in that clause. They say, there shall be no laws or government unless we authorise it, meaning unless we delegate it to someone. And then they say they'll meet in Congress, and then they talk about the King of England at the bottom. So we'll just go more to the te reo phrases used, because it's a really lovely way, if you're helping people understand the treaty, that you can ask, what's a word that you recognise already in the title of this document? Yeah, rangatira tanga. So it's the noun from the word rangatira. So it helps people understand that the Māori leaders of the time understood the concept of their authority and their control and their independence very, very well. So the other phrase, just to pass you on down into clause 1, they say, we declare our area to be a whenua rangatira. And Busby has translated that as an independent state, but in fact in the Ngāpuhi hearings they were quite clear that's much more like what you were saying, Brenda, an area of rich resources, an area of safe passage for people because there is an authority in place. So that's quite a deep meaning of the whenua rangatira. And so there you can see, and I want to draw your attention in the second clause to the beautiful words where the rangatira say in te reo Māori, ko te kingitanga, ko te mana I te whenua. So they're being incredibly generous to the international readers. They're not just saying the mana of the land is with us, ko te mana I te whenua, the mana from the land is with us. They're putting a transliteration in English, ko te kingitanga, the kingship and the authority. So it's a very, it's a generous way of saying it to make sure everyone understands. So, you know, the kingship and the authority from the land is with us. And then they do say in the second clause, but should there be any need to delegate governance elsewhere, then the kāwanatanga, we will be the ones who decide. Kia ora everyone, we've nearly finished. A slide that just recognises, and I will tell this one story because it sometimes helps the whole issue of whose tupuna didn't sign. So, te whero, when your colleagues were signing this, you said a very important thing. You said, I agree with everything that's written here, but I will go home to my people to sign. And actually, you came here to do that. You actually came to this Mangere area. So that's quite amazing. We're in the area where Te Whero signed, and it took 4 years to get to you. This document took 4 years. So there was no hurry, there was no pressure, it was just working its way down the country. As you can see there, then Tū Wharetoa signed, Iwiko, you signed, and then Kahungunu signed. So, you know, it just worked its way. It didn't get to the South Island, because in a way it is still a live document constitutionally. And that's quite true because the Hauraki rangatira waited 40 years or 50 years after the treaty, and I think the treaty was presented to them at some stage. Oh, sorry, it's a whole story. Some of them signed the treaty, other of their rangatira and the Hauraki didn't, and 50 years later they were so angry about what had been happening under the treaty that they asked for this and they signed this, which is quite amazing in 1890. And Tūhoi in 1916, when the government was doing the scorched earth in Tūhoi, they also, I'm not sure if they actually signed this or they just said we absolutely support the Declaration of Independence. So it's still live and for many iwi to leapfrog over the treaty and say no, we want that earlier document. So be aware of that when you're working with groups. Right, so now, end of the role play, last debrief question for the rangatira here before we let them go from the role play. What does it feel like to be sitting there? Just put some words to the feeling of being there. Solidarity?
Responsible.
Yeah, responsibility. In control. Ah, kia ora.
Feels very all proud.
Proud, yes.
Organised and unified.
Very organised, yes. Yeah, unified.
Move forward.
Yes, it's very forward looking.
That there's a good solid understanding that we're all on the same page, and if we go by this, we'll all be good.
Yeah, yeah, kia ora. That's just beautiful, Angela.
Excited?
Yeah, it is. It's a time of, yeah, into the future. Here we go. Very good. I'll ask Busby and then I'll ask all of you. So Busby, you finally get to say something. What's your impression of your fellow, the Confederation of Chiefs, at this stage in 1835?
I've got a lot to work with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of people to work with.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not just one person. Yeah, I've got a whole lot of people.
Yes.
To work with.
Yeah. Which is a good feeling. I mean, Busby worked quite hard to get this right. It was later that he changed his mind. Busby was a Scotsman. He understood that where the clans meet, that is the Scottish Parliament. So he had a real deep personal feeling that this is the Māori Parliament. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Busby was proud of this too. So kia ora to all of you. Thank you for experiencing and listening to this role play. When you see this group sitting here, what do you see? What impression do you get? To put description to it. Kia ora, Reb. Kia ora, Mingsu.
Strength.
Strength?
Yeah, just to say something powerful.
Powerful. Yeah, kia ora. Yeah.
Difference unified.
Yes, yes, diversity unified. Kia ora. Yeah.
To the new circumstances.
Right, adapting, yeah. Very flexible. Kia ora, with me.
A lot of thinkers with different points of view,
Yeah,
all working together
Yep.
and unifying the whole country.
Yep.
Like the whole country
Yep.
in one common voice.
Yep.
In the face of independent, in the face of independent hapu, it's like, yeah, shoot, we
Yep.
want to have cake and eat
Yeah.
that hapu,
Yes.
and we also want that unified recognition.
Yep, kia ora. Because this did not take away the power or autonomy or rangatiratanga of any individual hapu at all. Any one of these rangatira could go home, say this is what the wakaminenga thinks, and the hapu might say, nah, we're out of there. And they could leave, you know. Yep, so kia ora wirami. Yeah. So I'm going to finish it there, and that's a good place to finish it because it leaves everyone with that sense of, these rangatira were absolutely taking the country forward. They really were, and they enjoyed Busby being there. When Hobson came along, they just thought, oh, okay, Busby, you're off the chair, and then Hobson will sit on this chair, and then we'll actually have the actual rangatira delegated from England with the, with the military power to actually control his own people. They were very happy when Hobson arrived as well. And they actually said to him, interesting in the face of some of the Hobson's pledge, they said, we will sit as one with you. That was always their feeling. We can sit as one together. And it was Hobson and Busby here that they thought they could do that with. So that's a bit of a deepening of that, we are one people. So we'll...
But in reality?
What's that?
But in reality?
Well, okay, we'll go into facilitator mode. In reality, you can say to your group, what did Hobson actually do? And you can put a bit of a platform there ready. You can, and people can act out what they actually believe Hobson did actually do after 1840, how he did treat this group. Yeah, so that you can expand on that. Yes, thank you, Trish. Yeah.